The topic of the hour is smart applications. I'm going to start off with having all the panelists introduce themselves. Start from the far end.
Hi, I'm Masterson. I'm an application engineer at Kenandy Incorporated. We're a CRM cloud ERP built on Salesforce.com. And I presented a app I built at Dreamforce this year using H2O.
Hi, I'm Tom Kraljevic. I'm the VP of Customer Engineering here at H2AI. Thanks for everybody coming to H2O World, and we hope you enjoy the panel.
Hi, my name is Venkatesh Yadav from Adobe Systems. I've been at Adobe for a long time, and beginning this year started looking into the data space. And thank you for having me here.
Hi, I'm Kanishk. I'm VP of Applications at H2AI. Most recently, I ran the West Coast Analytics practice for Accenture, where we built state-of-the-art machine learning applications for the enterprise. Prior to that, I worked at Deloitte Strategy and a variety of product and consulting firms. Very excited to be on this panel.
Worked for Google. There we go. I worked for Google, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and several other consulting firms helping companies kind of with their big data strategy.
I'm Merritte Stidston. I'm the Chief Information Architect at McKesson. We're the world's largest healthcare company. Previous to this, I worked at Macy's, Anderson Consulting, GE, and GE Access, GE Capital Consulting. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start off. What are smart applications? Is that even a definition for these things, or is this just a buzzword? Are people actually building smart applications? Are these just regular applications which are being called smart now? And let me start with you, Merritte, this way.
I think it's actually a combination. It's a little bit of a buzzword, but on the other side, isn't that the whole purpose of what we're trying to do? Within inside of our technology stack today, we're trying to build them so that we have less interaction with them, where we can pre-program them so that they will do things for us rather than doing it manually. So we've called this very often automation. So if the advancement of this, it's automation with a bit of intelligence. So smart application, I'm okay with it.
Does anyone want to reject?
Yeah, I'll add that my viewpoint is that smart applications, is a part of considerate computing. So one of the things that's changed over the last 10 years in terms of computers is they're more considerate, meaning they consider the user up front. So things like machine learning, recommendation engines, are ways to engage the user more. So as you use the application, it learns your behavior. You're able to do more things with the application, and the application itself almost becomes an augmentation of the human being. And that's one of the things that we see as a kind of a change to how we approach applications in the 21st century.
The people who are at this very moment literally writing, I think, very long PowerPoint presentations on what exactly we mean by intelligent applications. I don't think they're necessarily something new. I think, from the very beginning of Microsoft Office, where you had that horrible little pop-up wizard point out and say, gee, are you trying to do something? People have been trying to crack this code around augmentation of your workflow activities with guidance for quite some time. I have a fairly broad description of what I even mean by augmented AI or ML-based applications. And at the simplest level, I think of AI or ML applications as simply getting us to an outcome, which is behavior change for your end customer, right? So an application can literally be a set of recommendations, could be a next best action, or simply go, do this thing. And if you can create a behavioral change in your organization, then you've actually taken insights to behavioral change and you've created an application on the field. I think another definition is sort of your more classic modality, which is, hey, I've got an analytics application that's sitting on either my phone or a desktop, and it's connected to an in-memory database in the back end. And now, thank God, we've got the compute power we finally need to be able to interactively manipulate and have a conversation with not only the data, but finally with the algorithms. So what one of my teams has been doing for at least the past year at my alma mater has been essentially building these essentially recommendation apps that are vertical specific and might be something like connected retail or predictions for the game business. And for each of these particular industries, we created what I would think are these behavioral change accelerators, which are simple, very friendly, well-designed GUI apps that tell you what to do so that an executive or a team doesn't have to necessarily get into the weeds of the analysis, but simply gets a clean recommendation to say, go do this. And I think a lot of the industry is going to start moving towards this paradigm of interaction with the data. And I think that is true ML and AI apps, and it's a great time in the Valley to be sort of working in this space.
Let me ask you, is it mandatory for these applications to be machine learning based to be called smart applications, or can you have just data-driven, simple heuristic-based apps? Are those smart as well?
In my mind, I think machine learning could be one of the ways that this could be accomplished. But I totally agree. I think the way things are going, where the compute power, the technology, and all is enabling a data-driven user experiences that could be very contextual, very predictive, and it just feels like this app is built for me, right? And the whole persona-based development should kind of go away, and then the app should able to predict the behaviors of the users.
I would agree that customization and personalization, those are definitely things that make the user experience better and is clearly the wave of the future. Being a little more specific, I guess what I'll say is, at H2O we build, we're a machine learning company, we build models, we provide tools to build models. And so one of the ways that we look at smarter applications is to say, well, if you kind of look at how people wrote applications historically, they'd write lots of logic. There would be lots of developers writing code. And one of the things that there's an opportunity to do now is to have the application learn from data and past historical choices and to be able to apply that. So if you kind of think of it transitioning from a rule-based application to a model-based application, that would be one characterization of a smarter application.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the term smart application, it doesn't have to necessarily be machine learning based, but I agree with what everyone's been saying. It's more of a focus on the user experience and how you drive the behavior that the person doesn't necessarily just tell the system what to do, but the system provides feedback and recommendations back to them. And machine learning is definitely one way to accomplish that.
It also seems like, based on what you guys are saying, this is much more applicable than the B2C applications, or at least consumer-focused applications, where the impact is immediately visible when you do a machine learning-based user experience. Are there applications in the B2B space, or even non-interface kind of applications that maybe?
So one of the applications that we're working on today is around looking at pattern matching. So we're going through clinical records, looking at all the different biomarkers that are inside the record. So when you look at how it's constructed, is that we have our EMR, or electronic medical record, and that has very structured data in it. But inside the record, there are a number of text fields, and then you attach other documents, lab results, notes, other doctor recommendations. It could be MRIs, could be any number of things. So what we're doing is taking and looking at how we can take with that pattern matching and truly bring the right diagnosis and the right treatment to the individual that's going to get it. And I'm working with Tom down here in our US oncology business to actually do those kind of things. One of the treatments, it's called small cell lung cancer. You're currently seeing ads for a treatment on it. Well, that one we're using as a baseline test, where it actually goes through and analyzes all of the information related to this patient, if we treated everyone with this drug, it's $200,000 for 1 year for treatment. So it's only effective 20% of the time, for 20% of that population that have very specific biomarkers. So being able to let the application go through, and now you talk about customized medicine, customized to the individual. And I think that in 5 years, this is going to seem extremely rudimentary. It's going to be going through the genomic record and then doing even more things to help predict. So instead of saying, people like you chose this book, it's going to be people like you got this treatment. That's a smart app.
You're going to get doctors out of business, huh? Probably. Which brings me to the next question is, often the resistance to, at least for big organizations in adapting or accepting smart applications is that a lot of entrenched skill sets are being done away with. So and I guess some of you have faced resistance in your organizations with, you have a really cool application, a demo, but the teams are like, you know what, rules are working fine for us. We don't really see the incremental value. And often there might be some hidden political, agenda there. But are those really true? And are those, how do you overcome those in organizations? And maybe I can start with Venkatesh here.
I had similar conversations where during an application development process, the infrastructure is already in place where a market research-based design, the design team, those all already exist. So, how do you start providing data-oriented user experiences and basically, experimentation and proof of concept and things of that nature and A/B testing to really prove that the technology has come to a point where predictive behaviors is technically feasible now compared to the past. And then, to add to the previous question you asked me, I think what is beyond the smart app is when my car tells me that, you are tired and go have a coffee or, or things of that nature where, these things are becoming part of the behavior. And another example was, I was talking to Vinod the other day about, Google now telling me that, hey, the traffic to Costco is pretty light now, you better go, things of that nature where it's something that comes to you and you don't feel like, it's invading your privacy, but you feel like, oh, wow, this is pretty cool, and I like it.
So the process, for building a smart application is often complex, and that's part of the reason why organizations are tough to, find it tough to adapt it, because you need a whole bunch of skill sets, people with different skill sets working together to build it. So Mark is an exception. He built this Salesforce application all by himself. He's a data scientist and a developer in one, but those are unicorns. Very tough to find those. What are the challenges of putting together a team? How do you get these people to talk? Maybe I start with Mark. What is the process of building your application?
I had the advantage of building my application on Salesforce, and Salesforce provides a very robust platform for prototyping an app. That's, I think, one of the ideal use cases for it. You get a UI automatically when you build your data model, which is nice. I was going off of the CRM data, so I was using opportunities. So taking opportunity data, I already had all the built-in Salesforce functionality and everything. So then just building the integration was making a web service call out to I use a Amazon S3 bucket to store a CSV, and then use the REST API from H2O to parse that and ingest it. And then building a UI in Salesforce is pretty simple, so to display that data back. So the process with Salesforce is fairly easy, and that's why I was able to do it as one developer for that.
So one of the things at Databricks and with Apache Spark, our motto within our organization is making big data simple. So when Matei first looked at Cloudera and all the Hadoop vendors, one of the big challenges was going from small data with Excel, like doing a simple sum in Excel is very simple, but doing a sum in Hadoop is rocket science. So the reason the team started Apache Spark was to make it simpler. So whether you're using really, really big data sets or very small data sets, you can still get value out of the data. Within Databricks, one of the things that we really talk about is data democratization. So when you use Databricks as a platform, You're able to work with both the data engineers, data analysts, and data scientists all in the same platform. You can all work together on the same problem to make it much faster going from your raw data set out to your actual predictive model.
I think designing smart applications begins with the D word, which is designing. I think we really underestimate the need to create hybrid teams when we're creating smart applications. So the typical engagement or team structure that I've often championed at multiple organizations now, including Accenture and Deloitte, is sort of this three-spoke model where we've got an application designer or design thinker who's at the forefront designing the use cases, asking the analytical questions and the outcomes that need to be solved. And we then pair that designer up in that pod with a quant, who is typically a statistician, and then finally a data strategist who knows how to do the mashups, bring the different data systems together and create the 2D data structures or the data frames needed to create the models. I think we need to create this sort of culture in general where we are bringing design thinking and design-driven development into smart application creation. And then going back to the resistance to change question that you had, I think a part of the designer is also not just designing the app, but then designing the follow-up changes that need to happen in the organization. So if there is resistance to automation, how are we going to educate the enterprise team that is going to most benefit from this application to get comfortable with saying, okay, my job is going to change now, and guess what? I can now actually do higher value add kind of work as opposed to the menial work that I was doing munging or looking at particular anomalies, because a lot of that can now be automated. So, I like to tell the story, you need a hacker, hustler, and a quant. And so, you need a designer, you need a data strategist, and you need a data scientist, and that pod is what creates innovative smart apps.
So I guess I would say people in general seem pretty willing and interested in developing or adopting new technologies and entering into the world of machine learning. People want to do it. I would say where we tend to see challenges is around the other D word of data, right? Just having the data be accessible, having it be available, having, especially in regulated environments like financials or healthcare, just getting access to the data is really a challenge in many cases. So if you're kind of asking what are the challenges, I would say that's a big one. In fact, we recently had a cardiologist from India come and sort of give us a big data pep talk of, you guys can change the world. And by making these technologies available in rural villages where there are no doctors, and just having a handheld diagnosis kind of a model that can take features of the patient and try to give you the top 3 types of illnesses they might have. Like that kind of thing can really make a big difference. But in this country, it's tough, right? Like he literally said sometimes the data is more valuable than the life of the patient. And so I would say that's a big challenge.
Yeah, I believe all along in the product development, we have always tried to build smart apps, right? It's just that we are at a point now where we are able to do data-driven, dynamic smart apps. Right?
Nice. Cool. Richard, let me come back to you. So as you mentioned, your platform provides a way for organizations to build these pipelines very effectively. Are you seeing companies are actually building those apps, or are you seeing more like people doing it? You just using Spark for analysis and Databricks as just a tool to run Spark?
So to paraphrase your question, so you're asking, do you see people doing it for exploration versus production? Yes. Okay. So we see both. It all depends on kind of the life cycle of the company. So one of the beauties of Spark and Databricks is the ability to be very experimentative. So one of the big changes that we find across all industries is really the adoption of Agile and specifically Scrum across all walks of life. I mean, literally last week I was at a very large bank, I won't say the name, and you see Scrum, Agile Manifesto everywhere, right? And this is a very stodgy bank. So the entire world is really adapting to how Silicon Valley approaches problems. And so, the first step with Databricks is always exploration. You prototype, you fail fast, you figure out what the right answers are, and then after you've done that, you can very quickly productionize it. So you can go from your idea of how to solve a particular problem. Once you get to a solution that works for you, you can quickly move it to production, and you can A/B test it. So you see if that actual solution is working in a real production environment, and then you iterate and improve. The biggest difference between enterprises that are successful today versus those that are going to fall off the cliff, frankly, are ones that can quickly adapt to what customers want, what people want, and what everyone needs.
That's cool. Which also brings to the point, and going back to Tom's point of how data itself is not accessible. And Databricks, I mean, you guys are a cloud company, and that question probably keeps coming up again and again. Like, there are companies who are very secure about the data. They are very protective about the data. They don't want to put it on the cloud. Or how can you, as business leaders or thought leaders, drive that inside organizations? How do you get companies or even decision makers to let them open up the data, enable building of these smart applications? And maybe let's start, Kanishk. Yeah.
I often think that the crusade to changing an organization is very much about beginning a journey to go get the data, right? I mean, one of my favorite role models in life, the late great Robert McNamara, wrote a great book, and one of his factoids on how to live a better life and be a better leader was get the data. It was one of his famous rules. And I think where we run into issues is because human beings are natural hoarders, and they, I think, intrinsically understand that data is probably worth something, and they don't like to share things. And getting past that cultural gap is a game of trust, and it, I think, is in itself a great motivator for behavioral change in an organization. I often think if you ask for the whole thing without a reason or a well-crafted data request, it's natural to accept and resist to that sort of a data request. But if you start with baby steps, if you start with a few experiments, a small, simple prototype, and actually start with the end experience of what outcome you're trying to accomplish, and then say, okay, how am I going to solve this problem with a certain set of algorithms? And then only go after the signals and the data elements that you absolutely need to solve that problem. You've already tied that full journey to say, I'm trying to create this outcome or this prototype with these algorithms and with these covariates or these particular signals. And then you've already created a journey, and you've created this crusade with the executives to say, this is why I'm trying to accomplish it. I think a lot of analytics efforts end up beginning with, well, just give me everything, which is typically how data warehousing or data marts begin, right? To say, oh, I'm going to create this global amazing model, and it's going to have every signal in the world there. Well, you know what? That's not how you do Agile, and that's not how you do an analytics project. And I think analytics sprints and Agile sprints are inherently these extraordinary opportunities for us every day to create momentum for everyday behavioral change. And so to go back to the answer, I think we create this change by starting by getting the people around a simple question that might need to be answered, a simple use case that needs to be productionalized, a simple prototype that we need to experiment with. And that, I think, just creates this chain reaction and culture where everybody gets around to it. So that's how I would tailor it.
Merritte to chip in as well, because you're at a Fortune 10 company. I suppose such a big organization, how do you move the chains?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's, McKesson's 183 years old, so we're one of the oldest companies in the world. So you can imagine the legacy, and when they talk about technical debt, but there's also a mental debt. This is the way we've always done it. These are the challenges, bringing us into the modern age. And I don't care how big you are. People often say, well, Google and Facebook. Let them be around 183 years, and we'll see where they are. So what we have to do is constantly be looking at how do we help the business or help those end users understand the value. If they can coalesce around something, that's what's important, so that we have a common goal. You were saying that you've got to take and work through this. Common goals are the number one way. Make sure that everyone feels good about what it is we're trying to achieve, enlist them as participants, and it makes the job a lot easier. I often say that there are two types of people, fountains or wells. There are those people that are the well. You have to take your bucket, dip it down in there, pull it all out, work. You need more information. You have to go back to them again, drop your bucket down over and over again. But those people that are wells, that give it out freely, they become indispensable because people realize their value. And the other thing, too, is people are lazy. If I know I can always go back to Joe and say, hey, Joe or Sally, I need this information again, and they get it again with no resistance, they want that person. So we have to take and cultivate those people that are fountains, work on it, work for common goals. And if you want your boss to really be excited, make it one of the strategic objectives. Help them understand why it's important, get it to be a strategic objective, and then other people will coalesce around that. So, common goals.
Thank you. Talking of technical debt, let me ask the engineers over here. If you were to advise a smaller company or a startup, and we have a bunch of startups attending today, if they want to plan for building smart applications and they haven't really thought about that, how would you, what should they keep in mind when they're building the data architecture? I mean, can I start with Tom?
Sure. I guess in terms of removing technical debt and sort of making that process a little bit smoother than it might otherwise be, it's helpful to always kind of have your benchmark. So if you sort of read about programming books that describe this sort of process or just engineering books in general, it's always very quality focused, right? Make sure that you start with a good infrastructure of quality, and then as you try to revamp your system, you know where you've been and you know that you're not getting worse. You always want to know that you're getting better, and to take your technical debt out just a little piece at a time, make sure that you're getting better, and it's a process towards improvement just continuously.
You might want to chip in?
I always think the key to isolating technical debt in the first place is encapsulation. So if you have your services encapsulated, if you do have technical debt, it should be relatively easy to identify it and remove it when you have it isolated and encapsulated from the rest of your system. So that lends itself to services that talk to each other.
Go ahead, Kanishk.
Let me just add to that by saying that I think a big part of that is increasingly what we're talking about in this emerging reality of what we call ecosystem engineering. I think custom apps, and I think if you were to look at custom apps 2.0, I think that's what smart apps are today. It's the natural evolution of taking and developing custom apps, making them intelligent and customizing them for the unique ecosystem of your client or customer scenario. So I think if you look at most of our customers or clients experimenting in this space right now, they've got this patchwork and hodgepodge of different analytical data systems out there. I think for us to build a smart app, one of the first technical barriers we have to get comfortable with is to stop necessarily just thinking as a product company and then working with all the startups and all the enterprise companies that are involved in this patchwork ecosystem that exists as a customer and say, well, how do I bring order into this universe? And how do I make the adjacencies between different startups and different enterprise licenses that are already at this customer work together? What's that data supply chain going to look like? And I think if you can create that, then the value proposition of then appifying it by creating this abstract layer that sits on top of that becomes an incredibly interesting value proposition for the customer, because you're essentially now solving two problems for them. Not only are you simplifying the actual conversation with the data and the algorithms, you're also essentially saying it's all invisible for you. The stuff behind the curtains, we figured out what ecosystem adjacencies and APIs we had to work with to create that end outcome for you. So it's really an opportunity to do some true technical transformation in addition to behavioral transformation.
Good, Akresh.
What has worked for us is, identifying key differentiating metrics or KPIs for our product, and then, show the new possibilities, and at the same time, influence the new thought process.
Right.
Those are the three has worked really well for us.
Okay. Yeah. So going back to this idea of the appification, I mean, you see a lot of these SaaS products, which is where you typically see, so they're sort of the first movers in terms of taking on or building smart applications. Is that a fair assumption or a fair generalization to make, or is that true? And if so, why? Why do you see these companies doing it more commonly?
I think SaaS companies, and I'm assuming you mean software as a service companies, as opposed to the evil giant we want to talk about, essentially have first mover advantage. And in essence, they've taken the easy way out and said, no to software and go ahead and solve the problem. But I think the ecosystem at our customer typically lends itself to a layer of complexity that not every software as a service company can solve straight out of the bat. There is always, I think, appetite for customization and uniqueness to the footprint of the data that is unique to not just the industry and sector, but the actual client or the cluster of clients that might have a similar problem. And when that happens, I think it's okay for us to go back and say, what is the custom smart app that I'm going to create for this customer, this 2 to 3 group of customers that's facing the same problem over and over again. And guess what? That might be a unique problem just for those 2 to 3 customers that then doesn't scale into a software as a service solution to thousands and thousands of companies. And SaaS companies, by virtue, are inherently going to solve the biggest scalable problems, right? So custom apps and smart apps in particular help us solve these really unique and interesting problems. And I think that alone makes them a very interesting value proposition.
Databricks is a SaaS company. So one of the things that is not necessarily unique to SaaS companies is still software. But we see companies like GitHub. We see companies like Atlassian going to the cloud. What we see a lot of is time to value. So the reason why we launched Databricks and put Apache Spark in the cloud is just time to value. So literally you can sign up and you can actually start doing Spark programming in an hour as opposed to waiting for weeks or maybe even months to set up servers, install the software, configure it, get approval from your information security, et cetera, et cetera. So we're seeing a lot more of that because as people adopt software and technologies, they will do it faster and faster to adapt to the market more quickly.
I guess one of the interesting things I would say about this is it's kind of, for software as a service companies, it's kind of a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, they have this incredible opportunity to leverage data from many, many different customers and to be able to compare that against each other. And it's sort of almost like a data farm in some ways, right? Everything's online. It's incredibly measurable, lots of analytics, lots of metrics. And I think that most SaaS companies really try to take advantage of that. The tricky part is because they've got all of these customers that all have the same platform as their base, in order to make a change, for one, you've got to make sure that you didn't break the other 499. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword.
And this also goes to the point of it's notoriously difficult to productize these smart applications. I mean, they often are very specific to use cases. Are there design patterns which you could plan for when you're building these smart applications so that you could apply them to multiple use cases? Or go ahead.
So the way we've typically tried to bring reusability into the journey here is starting with sort of the actual data frame, the 2D data structure, and say what are the 2 to 3 classic data domains that are most relevant to this customer or this vertical or this cluster of customers that's most relevant to us. And really appification and reusable patterns begins with us identifying reusable data structures. We start there. Then we create a layer of abstraction actually at the algorithmic layer and saying, can we have certain families or templates of models that we can create or customize for certain kinds of customers or verticals? And then alone do we say, do we have essentially interaction patterns that we can productize out there? I think a lot of people very quickly run straight to productizing the front end. But really, I think the journey begins with us saying, here's our data frame, and here are the 2 or 3 core domains of data or the kind of signals we're expecting to land in this data frame. And then here are the relevant patterns for the algorithms. And then, of course, the relevant design patterns and the outcome. I think following that 3-step method lets itself create this family of reusable widgets that become incredibly powerful for our developer community out there.
Yeah, but I guess my sort of question on this is that the basic assumption here is that you could put data science in a box of sorts, and you're assuming that a bunch of these problems are going to look like I'm going to do the same transformation, same set of action, same set of feature engineering, and same set of models. Maybe you have some variation, but you're assuming that I can do that for, and any data scientist here will tell you it's notoriously difficult to do that. Every data set is different, and when you try to apply the same data model or same set of feature sets, you often get absurd results, if not incorrect ones.
I don't know. I totally agree with that, and mainly that you have major categories of buckets. So logistics, finance, HR. So within inside of that, you've got very well-defined sets of use cases. It's like people. You know, we all have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, 2 ears, a tongue, but we're also all very unique. So the trick in my mind is finding the nuanced differences. That's where I see the advanced analytics as being key to solving this puzzle. With machine learning, you can find things that you didn't know that transcend what's visible. So that to me is where it comes in. The buckets are all very well defined. McKesson delivers drugs. We have logistics problems. Regardless of what company you are, Delta, you've got logistics problems. So it's being able to look at what are the pieces and parts that are unique to you, and that's where a lot of these advanced algorithms, machine learning, deep learning are really coming into play.
Mark, I'll take it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely say, I think it's a lot of identifying the common domain among businesses. If you can identify that common domain, then you can really start to productize an app that uses machine learning. Because you're right, a lot of the times there is very specific data process. The app I built probably isn't a good example of something you would want to productize, but there's people who are trying. Trying to rank opportunity for salespeople, their opportunities that are coming in their pipeline, that can vary on so many different factors for so many different businesses. But I think that's a great example, like supply chain management. Everyone has that same problem, and that is a great domain for doing something like this.
So anything you do in terms of analytics, always start with the goal. And the goal really comes from your mission as a company. So as an example, Amazon, they're going for the lowest possible price. If you look at like a Nordstrom, they're looking for more of an overall customer experience. So if you look at analytics, start with the goal, and then you figure out how do I want to use data science to kind of accomplish that goal. So if you're Amazon, you're trying to maximize throughput, basically number of sales, in any given second. They want to maximize that throughput to maximize the revenue. That's their goal. Whereas a Nordstrom or other high-end retailers want to maximize on customer experience. So how can we do things like next best offer? How can we personalize? How can we give an in-app experience to get people through the store in a way that's going to have a good overall experience with buying a shirt or a pair of shoes or pants? So it is, when you look at analytics, it's not just like one size fits all. It's all about how analytics drives a goal and also drives you toward your mission as a company and your culture.
Good.
I'll just say this. I come from the management consulting background. Please don't hold that against me. But a lot of people, I think, when our business started many decades ago, didn't start with frameworks or best practices or accelerators that we've pretty much productized with the likes of McKinsey or Bain today. Now, you give those accelerators to someone who does not have the design mindset of using them, he's going to struggle with them. But you give him enough time, he becomes a master at using them. So going back to, I think, reusable patterns, I think it's in our nature to create these reusable patterns to get acceleration in the actual customization effort. When you're working at a McKinsey or a Bain, you take these frameworks, but you very quickly customize them to your client or customer scenario. I think we're going to end up doing quite a bit of that with the design patterns we're creating now at H2O for the industries, verticals, and clusters of clients we're going to work for, right? So A simple one might be, start with the end goal. Well, there are now prioritization frameworks out there on how do you prioritize the analytical end goal. A common one we use when we're prioritizing use cases is, well, do you have the data to solve this use case? Is there an executive sponsor around this use case? And if I do create a predictive model around this and a prediction around this, am I going to create a campaign around this in the next 30 days? Yes, 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 rises to the top. And guess what? It's a very simple framework, and there are 10 other variables you can add to it. But we're only beginning to, I think, institutionalize as an industry all these different frameworks out there. Another one, just to get tactical, this was at a client of ours that was essentially doing sales analytics, predicting what a person's comp ought to be. And they had data from all kinds of different 20, 30 different systems. And we started with a very simple framework, which we said, okay, do you have all the relevant profile data? Then do you have the behavioral data? And then do you have any psychographic data? If you've got those 3 buckets to start with, let's just start putting and mapping all your different data signals into these big buckets. And so the signals can be completely unique to the client or customer scenario. Some SaaS companies or some companies analytics companies will force you to map every single covariate or signal in their system to the client system. But you could start broader and say, no, these frameworks will let me bring my relevant signals into these 2 or 3 core domains, as he was talking about. And that alone will accelerate the data scientist's job by 2x, 3x. So I think right now the industry is only just maturing to create these reusable patterns that's going to give them 2x, 3x. I think once we're past that, then we're going to end up creating the true 10x based frameworks that's going to make our lives so much easier.
Sure.
Establishing a baseline, I think, is really valuable. And in fact, if you go back to the SaaS question, the software as a service question, despite the fact that there are definitely challenges once they establish a baseline, and Salesforce is a great example of this, and I'm sure in the future Databricks will be as well. Once you've, if they're not already, right? I mean, once you establish a baseline, you've got it. And everybody can benefit from that, and that's a huge advancement in terms of what people can do.
I want to also, I only have 5 minutes, but I want to give the audience a chance to ask a question. Do you want to take the mic? Yeah. So he's going to bring the mic over here. Okay. Here, Nadeep. Sorry, Shanma.
So in the machine learning space, mostly have been talked about is the modeling algorithms or cluster computings. But one areas that that's suitable for some use cases that has not been talked about yet is the data security, where cryptographies, encryption, decryptions are really key components. What do you see, the trend towards the data security?
So I can take that. I've actually tackled a couple of cybersecurity projects now, all using machine learning, if that's what your question was. And one of my favorite ones is actually for a global gaming company. And they want to essentially reduce chargebacks or payments or credit card fraud in their online gaming ecosystem. And I think that is a classic example where you've got billions of signals coming in an online ecosystem where you simply cannot solve this problem without machine learning mechanisms and, quite frankly, real-time mechanisms tied to your ML mechanisms. So I think security might very well be a killer app for ML in the next 5 years or so. It might be other things out there, but I think we're only beginning to see this cusp of new security applications out there which are dealing with everything from fraud detection to global threat detection to chargeback reduction, things of that nature. And you're going to, I think, see multiple startups working together, giving data feeds to ML companies to help create apps that solve unique security problems for the customer because they've got spouts and data signals coming in from all these different disparate security companies that all solve a point problem. We can train ML algorithms on looking at it holistically and finding patterns across these different startups or enterprise companies, each solving their own security signal problem, and then creating a unique security solution unique to the customer. So I think, I'm a strong believer that security might be one of the first true killer apps that drives the industry towards to new revenue.
I look at whether or not it's competition I'm going to learn something from.
Totally with what he's saying, and we're pursuing some of those. What I heard on the data security side was how do we take and have all this data, move it into the cloud? How do we exchange it, allow everyone to have access to it? Because if I have the crown jewels, but people can't take and leverage the value in it, what good is it? I've just kept it to one small group. Tom brought that up earlier. In healthcare, we have not only our legal obligations to the businesses, we have our legal obligations to the patient, and then we have legal obligations that are from governance that are applied to us by the federal government or the state governments, and then there are huge penalties that come with that. So one of the things that we have done is looked at it and saying it's the unglamorous part, this data governance and data security. We're embedding that in, just as you would any of the security systems in your car. You put them in, when you buy it, they're all there. Nobody walks up anymore and asks for anti-lock brakes. They don't ask, do you have, there are a lot of things you don't ask. Do you have seatbelts in the car? We don't ask that question. We're looking at the console, how we interact with it. So for us, on the data security side, bundle all that in early, pay the cost of that up front, and then move on.
One last question. By the way. You're out of time, unfortunately. Oh, go ahead, Venkatesh, one last, final words.
I believe we are living in the world of instant gratification, right? And smart apps, to me, is self-guiding application, right? Tomorrow at 2:30, me and my team member are presenting on it. So, if that's of area of interest to you, please join us tomorrow at 2:30. Same here.
I'm presenting at 2 tomorrow, so you can catch us back to back.
Double header. Thank you.